Way to go, Margot. Thank you, Margot. I had the mic muted, so yes, thank you. And let me take off closed caption.
That's good. That's fine.
No, thanks, Margot, for letting us know. That was great. So I was muted, so thank you. Perfect. Okay, so Marge and Ace at home, great to have you here. We are recording. Oh, I'm supposed to go to Facebook though, too. So much to remember. Hey, so we're a Lutheran. Oh, I got that.
Thank you.
Live stream, yes, got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. All right, well, with that, let's make sure the chat is good. Yeah, got that. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give thanks for the opportunity to study your word, and especially today as we hear Moses's call and his encounter with you, where you gave us and him your name. So let this edify, build up, strengthen our faith and our walk, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Here. Chapter 3, the burning bush. Remember where, oh, and also for the sake of the recordings, I messed up last week, so nothing got recorded either on Facebook. So if you were our Facebook viewers, sorry, I had a technical error last week right here. And so we didn't get that recorded. So we talked about God hearing the groaning, the cry of the people. And we, of course, before that had, talked about the midwives, and what happened last time was Moses saw a Hebrew being beat up and treated poorly by an Egyptian, and he killed the Egyptian. He murdered the Egyptian. And word of that got to the Pharaoh, and Moses had to flee to Midian, where he found himself a wife, family. And so that's where he's at, is in Midian, which, let's see, is this my map? No, that's my other thing. Let's see here, where's my map? Well, maybe it's over here. No. Got too many things pulled up here. Oh, there it is, here. So Moses was here in Egypt, but Midian is down here. So he's way down here. Midian actually is on, see, where's the Dead Sea, is over here, but most people think this is the area that he was at. So let me just see. Egyptians enslaved the Israelites. Gotta go up higher. Here we go. Moses flees to Midian. So there's the route, and this is the area of Midian down here. But most people think he's in this area because that's where most people think Mount Sinai is. And we'll talk about that when we get to the burning bush, believe it or not. All right. So there you go. There's our context. That's where we're at. And now we pick up at chapter 3. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. So What's going on here? What is this? Moses is curious. When the Lord saw, and maybe this is a good time to remind you that the all caps Lord is the tetragrammaton, the name of God that Jewish people would not say because it was so sacred. So they inserted the vowels
Yahweh,
of Adonai, which is Lord.
Adonai,
Yes, so, even though it says in Hebrew, the name of God, when they got there, they would always say Adonai, which is, yes, Adonai, right? Like, whose song?
Yeah.
Amy Graham, yeah, yeah. So, so it's important, just a good reminder, I know we've talked a lot about that, but that's, anytime you see Lord capitalized, that is actually the name that we're gonna hear being given to Moses. He saw and turned aside to see, and God called him out of the bush, Moses, Moses, and he said, here am I, here I am. Then he said, do not come near, take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. All right, so there you go. There's our encounter. God calling Moses. We got the burning bush. What are some things that strike you or, you know, are of,
strike my approach.
yes. What do you think, Ollie? Yeah.
I think that I would be afraid to look at my,
Yes, I would be afraid too.
I
Yeah,
would be afraid to look at my father.
yes, right. I would be very afraid at this point. Ross,
God doesn't want anybody to see his face
God doesn't want anybody to see his face
anymore.
anymore. What do you mean by
Well,
anymore?
he walked with Abraham, he wrestled
Ah,
Jacob.
yeah,
so-
okay. That's something we gotta wrestle with, is, and even when he did wrestle with Jacob and turned him into Israel, even when that happened, it says an angel of the Lord, it was a man, right? But then Jacob says, I wrestled with God. So there is kind of a intermediary, or I don't know what the right word would be.
Intermediate.
Yeah, there. But notice the angel of the Lord shows up here again. This is something that I think, yeah, please, Paul.
Well, it seems to me that the passage itself defines who the angel of the Lord is. Because it being the antecedent of God and, God called to him and said. So it's almost, it seems to me to kind of define who this angel of the Lord is, because it's referring back to the one who is there.
Yeah, which is God, right? Is that your point?
Yeah.
Yeah. So why is it that we have the angel of Lord and God kind of put together?
Intervening.
Yeah, intervening, and it's like there's a distinction, but yet they seem to be one and the same.
Hologram.
I wonder if it's all. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, Sharon,
I've seen it. Dennis Prager's book on Exodus.
yes,
I have to find it. We still had it, and that's the Jews writing, and they said that God will present himself to us in ways that we can deal with. And an angel of the Lord, or he may use a person temporarily or whatever.
or a burning bush.
Yeah, burning bush.
Yeah, yeah,
That, he points out that the the fact that Moses even went over to check out the burning bush. Some people would just see it, oh, there's something, and go on with their work.
Right, but he took notice and he looked into it, yes. No, that's very helpful. It's clear. And we're gonna see another spot where God says, doesn't let Moses see God face to face. And Moses is scared, like Ali said, to see God face to face, because if you did, you wouldn't survive it. Yes, Gloria.
I think it's interesting, he said, here I am, here I am, right, who are you?
Who are you? Yeah,
There, he has the relationship with God.
okay, sure. Yeah, yeah, it's not like he's like, who is this calling to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. He seems to know who's calling, at least. And that it's got,
I'm sure he's scared and shaking in his boots, but, well, it's handled, but
yeah,
at least I think he had.
yeah, nice. I think that's really helpful. Here am I, yes.
Wasn't there an Old Testament prophet that said that, here I am?
Yes, so that's also, we're gonna hear that from Samuel. We just heard it. We just heard it last Sunday, in fact, Ross, so you're right on with that. Ally, sorry.
Here I,
Oh. Who is that, Aerosmith?
Scorpions.
The Scorpions. I thought you were gonna say that we have a song we sing in worship by, is it by Marty? It's out of GIA, I don't know, it's by Marty. Here, when we sang it last Sunday, here I am. Is it I, Lord? Yes, please, Audrey.
But God doesn't tell him, don't look at my face.
Not yet.
Yeah, but he just tells him not to walk in that area.
Yeah, take off your shoes.
Yeah.
So this is holy ground. There's a cool song about that too, isn't there? Take off your shoes. You're standing. Anyway, sorry.
Thinking like our president, he sends his career right away. The chief guy himself, God, I can picture him using his angel, saying, this is direct for me, get it to that person. And in ways that that person can accept it or not just be stunned to the ground.
Well, and I would say the point of the whole incarnation, when God taking flesh, is so that we could, we could actually hear and know and encounter God. And that's where the New Testament will come along and say Jesus is the image of God. And he is, so when you're looking at Jesus, you're looking at God. Yes, so no, we need that, but going back to what Paul said, I think there is this Paul, not the Apostle Paul. Although I think the Apostle Paul would say this too, that a lot of people wonder about this angel of God figure. And from a Christian standpoint, the Jewish folks, of course, would not accept this, but from a Christian standpoint, when we think about God as Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, three persons, and we hear about this angel of the Lord, there is some, I think, credibility to say, wow, is that angel of the Lord, the messenger, the Word, the second person of the Trinity? Don't push it too far, but I think it's okay to say, maybe, because the Trinity wasn't invented when Jesus became flesh. That's a heresy. The prologue to John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. So there wasn't a time when the Word was not. The Word was God, exactly. So, and yet there's a distinction between the Word and God. And so this is where we won't go down the 300 years of Trinitarian work to get to the Council of Nicaea, but it's just know that angel of the Lord thing is there. It's like, interesting. Like I say, I don't think we want to push it too far, but I think as Christians, we can't help but wonder about that. Okay, so we got the angel of the Lord. He looks at the bush. We've got holy ground. Take off your shoes. Moses says, I am, or here I am. What else at this stage? We wanna hold up and celebrate and think about.
The bush is burning, but it isn't burning.
The bush is burning, but it's not burning. So,
Faith and isn't that what I say? I think.
good point. You guys know your Old Testament well. Isaiah also, when he swept up into the temple, he says, I'm a man of unclean lips. So he wants to hide. He like, I'm in trouble. I shouldn't be here. Moses has a similar experience. I think it's interesting. God says, take off your sandals, because this is holy ground. I wonder if that's why sometimes people take off their shoes. In some cultures, you know, it's rude to leave your shoes on, not just because you're gonna get dirt in there. Like for us, it's usually we don't wanna get the carpet dirty, and that's fine, but if you take off your shoes because it's a I don't know, it's a respect, honor thing.
Well, Moses was a shepherd.
And Moses is a shepherd, so.
The shoes would have been hurt.
Are you saying, what is he stepping in? That could be part of it. I love it. Okay, one quick one, so don't lose your thoughts. So I just want to throw it out there because it popped in my mind and I don't want to lose it. Remember too, when we talk about being in the presence of God, this carries on even into the tabernacle. There's all this stuff that you have to do so you are not sinful or unclean before you come before God, because if you do, you probably would die. And then even in the temple, when this tabernacle gets a permanent home in Jerusalem, you know, they had the big curtain that separated the Holy of Holies. And, you know, as the legend goes, the priest who went in once a year on the Day of Atonement into the Holy of Holies would always have a rope tied around his ankle, so that if he went in and he wasn't pure and he was sinful, he would die. But of course, no one could go in there and get him, because they would die. You know, you'd have this cycle. So, you know, full amount. So they took this pretty seriously. That's my point. Okay, there was one here. Yeah, Audrey, and then yeah.
I was gonna just say that God reminded or confirmed to Moses who he was, the God of your father, Abraham.
Oh, yes.
And Jacob.
So we'll talk some more about that. Yeah, we'll get Kathy's on here too.
Is back to Genesis, and this is the same way that here I am, that Abraham answered God when God told him to take his son to Mount sacrifice.
Wow.
So it's the same again, and when God calls him to interrupt the process. So, and it says in the notes that it's the answer is the response of a servant.
It's the response of a servant to say, here I am. Nice, nice. Thank you for reminding us, and thank you, your Bible, for reminding us of the Abraham parts. That's right, that's right. So, and then when Samuel comes along, you know, he thinks Eli's calling him, and finally Eli says, I think it's the Lord. So, you know, next time just say, here I am, Lord, and he does. So, yeah.
Talking about even showing respect, you know, he was just, Samuel, but, growing up in the Lutheran church, we went into the church and we had a choir.
Yes.
And even my kids, when our kids, we went to church, they were to be quiet.
Yes.
And that's not the case anymore. And I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I heard somebody chiming in from home, but hold on one second. We'll get you, we'll work with Gloria's comment here real quick about holy ground. How is it that we set apart sacred space? We as human beings, it's really helpful to have sacred space. I was taught in seminary, and I think probably even before that, that the altar area or the table area technically isn't any more sacred than the parking lot. But hold on, don't. But we need sacred spaces and we invest in them so that they will pay off, so that the word can be preached and administered. So it isn't the space as such, it's what happens there that makes it holy. The table, the altar is holy because,
We feel secure.
yes, we feel secure, we feel, we get that sense of being in a holy place. And so it's really what happens there that makes it holy. And so we need holy places. Now, Gloria mentioned that the way that was set apart, and that's what holy means, by the way, set apart, weighty, but also set apart. And so we need those sacred places. And one way we could do that is to everybody be quiet unless you're singing a song or whatever. I appreciate that you said, I don't know if that's good or bad, because unfortunately, it's a cultural thing that people experience that who come to worship, not as necessarily I'm in a sacred space, but I'm in a cold, uncaring, uninterested in me place. And that's the balance that we struggle with. So how do we set it apart? Well, it used to be you didn't take coffee into church. But,
And it still should be.
and it still should be, Joyce, there you go.
Absolutely.
If you go to a modern church, if you don't have a coffee in your hand, they know you're a visitor. Good. So because, and let me just make this point though, even though I agree with Joyce, I don't see any reason to have coffee because I don't let anybody else sleep.
Take your time to do it before you come.
Yeah, that's right. And it's the same thing though. I mean, it's the same thing though with how we dress.
Yeah.
The old school would say you dress in really nice clothes, your best that you have to go. I know. Hey, Sharon's get in here, go.
They are so bad, and they discover all kinds of things going as far back as we can possibly go, and they always find a religion. They find a sacred space. I
They
think
find,
it's
yep,
God put in us when he said he made us in his image.
yes,
So there's something about humanity, and now our culture wants to equalize everything.
Yeah.
Take any importance out, anything that could be possibly important that we can't control. We want to be done with it. Yeah.
you make a good point about archaeology. We can go all the way back and we see that there were altars and sacred spaces and that, from the beginning. So we have this need, it's a part of our want to be in touch with God. I want to just reiterate a point and then I'm gonna be, just because I don't want, the traditional view to only be the one articulated here. So first thing, it's really powerful though. I want to make sure we get the Reformation versus the sacred space in the Roman Catholic Church in Luther's day was sacred, and you had the privilege of going there, and going there, it was almost like a work we do for God. And you had all these masses being done and, various, and nobody was listening, nobody was even there to receive what was being done. But remember when Jesus said, the Sabbath was created for us, not us for the Sabbath. The sacred spaces are created not for us to do something to God, which is the way it was in a lot of cultures and is in a lot of religions. The sacred space is for God to do something to us and preach to us. So the table is sacred. Why? Because Jesus is going to give us his body and blood, his very presence in a meal. The altar, the pulpit is sacred because that's where the word is delivered. The sanctuary is sacred because that's where we sing and we worship God, and God comes to us in word and sacrament. We have a set apart space for God to do something to us and for us.
You're bringing back a wonderful memory I have when I was in nursing school. We had a prayer room,
Ah,
a separate space.
yeah,
And if you needed to go and pray or read the Bible or something away from all the hubbub, it was there.
yes, yeah, and most hospitals still have a little room somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is in our dormitory.
yeah, yeah, that is cool. Now, let me just say though, because we always have to live and we have to be of the world, but not in, no, in the world, but not of the world. The weird thing in our culture is that wearing a tie and a suit to church, for instance, to a lot of people comes off as who are you trying to impress? You're trying to impress your neighbor, look at you, how well you're doing, and, you know, but obviously it's what's in your heart and why you do something, it's important, but this is why things have different meanings. And that's why it's the same thing as everybody being quiet when you come into church. To a lot of people, that comes off as cold and harsh, and people leave like they were as cold as fish. I don't wanna go back there. Or, man, look at all, I don't have that kind of suit, I like jeans. And I like my Hawaiian shirt, so, you know, if I can't come to church and be who I am, God knows my heart, I don't need to dress it for, you know, so there's different ways that people come at this, and I think each one has its pluses and minuses. I love here that people dress how they want to dress. So, and there's not an entrance requirement, but it's weird how things get communicated by how you dress. And the culture. And there's pros and minuses. Sorry, at home, go ahead. Or is there somebody that wanted to jump in?
The pastor's not wearing, the collar.
Oh, yes, there's another one. Ace chimed in and said that, he had to get used to pastors not wearing the dog collar, as I call it, the M. And that the same principle applies. For some people, that is a very helpful symbol of the office of pastor.
Yes.
It means something, like if I show up in the hospital with my collar, it does something for them because they've invested in that. For other people, it's a negative. And in the Northwest here, I did wear a collar back in my first call, but for some reason I stopped here. It was partly because of some members who had really bad experiences with people, with priests. And when they saw that collar, it was like almost post-traumatic syndrome type of thing. And really, yeah, I mean, if you had a priest abuse you or hurt you, and then you see me wearing a collar, you know, so, but also it wasn't just that, it was just that I didn't need it. It didn't seem like most people, you know, that it meant that much to most people. But again, if I was in a different context, I would consider wearing it, although I don't. But
It
anyway.
depends on what congregation you're at.
Go ahead, Ace.
It depends, I think, on which congregation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great point, great point. Ethel May and then, oh, we got lots now. How did we know we were gonna start talking about this? Okay. Ethel May and then Gloria.
Well, when I was doing the seminary classes and I was also serving the congregation, I asked the committee that was working with me,
Yeah,
did they wish I would wear tie? Because I wasn't. And no, it didn't make any difference to them. And then 2 weeks later, I was at a seminary class and the professor said, it may not make a difference to people, but when you put that collar on and look in the mirror, it makes a difference to you.
uh-huh,
You know who
Nice.
you are
Yeah.
and what you're here about. And so then I started wearing it.
yeah, good point. Excellent. Gloria, yeah.
Well, I think about, funerals,
Mhm.
a lot of people dress in black.
Yeah,
And I don't want people to dress in black, I want to wear bright colors.
yeah. There you go, Kathy.
Just a little side note, I was. It was not. Just like, they have, what to wear.
Yes,
And they said, yeah, red is the power. And it's where,
on Pentecost. Reformation.
No idea if it stems from that. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so we got talking about how we dress in church
Bill,
and how we set apart sacred spaces.
Bill, why does Jonathan wear the collar one day a year?
Right, one more from Ace here. We didn't hear you, Ace. Go ahead.
Why does Jonathan wear the collar one day a year?
I haven't seen Jonathan wear a collar, but maybe he's worn one for a few things. I'm not sure.
Okay, once a year he wears one.
Oh, maybe on Good Friday or something. I don't know that. I don't know that, Ace. That's a good question.
Or intern or a collar should come and visit me at the hospital, she could get any place she wants.
Yes,
Yeah.
I can say that when you go to a Catholic hospital in particular, that does open some doors.
That's
All right, couple more and then let's get back to the text. Sharon, yeah,
Geographically, my son's
yes,
business was way down southeast. And the boss said, I'm coming to visit your people at Microsoft.
yeah,
When he showed him. So top,
yes,
and Jeremy, he did because but he said, I know these guys. So he comes in and had a big meeting with who happened to be the decision maker,
yeah,
and he was wearing flip flops.
yes, yeah.
And the guy said, this is all very well and good. Would you please take me to your decision maker? And the guy said, I am the decision maker.
Yeah, see, it means something to some people. Different things mean different things for me. Jerry, yeah,
First suit was confirmed,
yeah, there you go.
and it's just something I've always worn as a church
Yeah,
ever since.
yeah,
And it's not because I want to look any better than anybody else.
Nope.
Feel it, want to do.
yeah,
And you see more people in the Midwest and the East Coast dressing up to go to church
yeah,
here.
absolutely.
And the interesting thing about the funeral over at Baptist Church last Saturday, and you saw suits all over the place,
Yes,
which you never see there.
yeah, interesting. So it was the occasion also that maybe affected it. No, that's exactly right. And you're right, the Northwest is much more casual than the Midwest and the East Coast. In fact, I always know when there's a pastor from the East Coast in particular, because they wear their collar, not just when they're in church, they wear it all the time. Like they come to a clergy event and they're wearing their collar. And I'm like, again, because they see it like this professor was saying. So that's really true. And Jerry, I think it's a beautiful thing. Because that's what it means. It means respect. You're respecting, you're honoring God by dressing in this way. And I think we should continue to celebrate that, even while we make room for people who look at it differently.
Lots
Yeah,
of people are at church, that's what counts.
that's right. Okay, one more.
One more.
Why I like seeing you in the collar.
Mary Lou.
What's that? Oh, Mary Lou.
Always wears a dress,
Yeah,
always, and always wears
I have.
she has been doing that forever.
And that has biblical roots. Paul says no woman should come into the presence of God without a covering. Church, as a kid, and with my Missouri Synod congregation, every woman wore a. Anyway,
She had a different mask for.
all right. Back to the text. We got there, but there was the comment Audrey made about the God of Jacob, of Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Jacob. This is important because this God is saying, I'm the one who chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am the one of your story. It isn't just some ethereal God exists, it's the God who's active in history. I'm at work in history. That's what this is saying. By saying, I'm the God of Jacob and Isaac, and I'm sorry, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm a God at work in history. So that, we don't want to miss that. That's important. Yeah.
So that means the Jews were following. The Jews hadn't forgotten about God, even though God had forgotten about them, is that what?
Well, the text says that God didn't forget about them.
Well, let him slide.
For 400 years, but
They were carrying on the rituals.
it does say that they continued to know who God was. I think that is a good conclusion. That Moses certainly, even though he doesn't have this, there's a lot of talk like, did the people know God's name before this, or was this the first time? And that's a question. Technically, this is where God gives the name, but Yahweh, which is the name, so, to our Jewish folks, sorry, I'm using that. But Yahweh is in Genesis. It's used to refer to God back then, but this is where they're given that name. So, did they have it before this? These are interesting questions. All right, good. How are we doing? We're doing good. Ace, you got one more?
Yeah, just, I love history, and I've always wondered how God came about, the history of God, how the word came about, and how he came about, if you want to say it that way.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at a technical issue here. It's not on. I guess it's supposed to be on. Yeah, no, helpful, Ace. All right, let's keep going. Moses is hiding his face, afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. So look at the verbs here. Then Yahweh, I am who I am, said, I have surely seen the affliction. So he's seen.
Cat text. Video.
Sorry, it's okay. I have to mute that, yeah. I have heard their cry, so I've seen, heard.
No.
I've known their sufferings, and I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land of the Egyptians, and bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So that's a lot of verbs. That's a lot of God action words. Seen, heard, I know, I've come down, I'm going to deliver, I'm going to bring them out of the land into a good place.
A summary of the whole story.
Yeah, right. Just like when I talked last Sunday about Jesus's call, he heard, he called, he chose, he's the working agent. People have talked a lot about the difference between law and gospel in our Lutheran tradition. And one way to try and distinguish when you're dealing with law is when it's something, let's see, I always get object and subject mixed up. But, is God the object or the subject of the verb? He's the object here, right? He's the one doing the action, or maybe is he the subject? He's both. Yeah, he's the subject. So when God is the subject of the verbs, you got gospel. Or when Jesus is. When we're the subject of the verbs, it's law, because it's what we're supposed to do. So it's just, it's not always the case, but it's something you can think about here. It feels to me like the heat shut off. Does it feel like that to you?
Yes.
It didn't kick on overnight again. Turn the burning bush back on.
Sorry to bother you. Can you check to see if the heat's still on? It feels like it's shut off. It was warmer when we started, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because I took off my, okay. Okay, I just think that's cool. This is a lot of good news. This is promise. This is what God's gonna do. And he's gonna bring them into a land. Now, what about this? He's gonna put, milk and honey to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Pezerites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Those were the people who inhabited Jerusalem. So I don't make a joke about it, but it's always a struggle when you say, well, whose land is it? Who was there first?
Yeah.
Well, you gotta go way back, but the Jebusites had Jerusalem before the Jewish people did. You know, so I'm not saying that, I'm not making any points, I'm just saying, you know, and now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. So, we get the whole story, like Doug said, I'm gonna bring them out, I'm gonna bring them into the land, I've come down. Gerhard Forde, a famous Lutheran theologian, said that is gospel in the penultimate gospel. God comes down. God comes to us, in other words. God breaks in, however you want it, the heavens are open, God comes to us. That's what is needed, and that's what happens in this story. All right. All right, yeah, let's keep going. I've heard the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I've also seen the oppression in which the Egyptians oppressed them. So we get some repetition there. Again, this is where some people feel like what we've got is a weaving together of a number of different traditions. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. So now, more information.
I've got good news and bad news.
Yeah, I've got some good news and bad news. Here's the good news. The bad news is you're gonna be the one to do it. All right. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? So I love that. He does say, here I am, but then his first reaction is what? Who am I?
He's a reluctant leader.
He's a reluctant leader.
And how many of us are?
Yeah, Gloria, yeah, how many of us are right in those shoes? And this shall be a sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. So there's even a foreshadowing that, you know, this mountain of the burning bush is, and by the way, that bush in Hebrew and Sinai sound very similar. So there's a little play on words there perhaps, but, so, you know, you're gonna be back here and I'm gonna be giving you the 10 Commandments, you know, I'm gonna be giving you that. Yes, Paul.
It's interesting to me as we've gone through this. If you compare and contrast Moses' encounter and response to Isaiah in chapter 6 of Isaiah.
Yes,
It's really interesting. God says, who will go for us? And here he is commanding Moses to go.
right.
And they have some similarities in their responses, you know, but it's just, and God knew probably that if he said to Isaiah, who will go, Isaiah would say, send me.
Yes,
And with Moses, he knew that you would probably say, I'm not going.
yeah, right. So there we've got a difference right there, don't we?
At
Yeah.
least he didn't go the opposite direction like Jonah.
He didn't do quite like Jonah did, but he was not certain about this. And this is just so helpful that he's not certain about. Who am I? I've often said the first qualification, probably true for a pastor, for any Christian. It's certainly true for a bishop. I've always said anybody that wants to be a bishop shouldn't be one.
Yeah.
You know, because you know, I'm sorry. That it's not about glory, it's not about achievement. I mean, we're all humans, so I'm sure if one were to be elected bishop, it's a, wow, what an affirmation of my ministry. I'm not saying that's bad. But I always thought back when when there'd be all this conversation, who are we gonna elect as bishop? Because of course, in our system, bishops are elected, not appointed. Like if I saw somebody kind of lobbying, I was like, okay, scratch them off my list. I'm just, that was an instant no-go for me. But anyway, it's a natural thing. I mean, think about, I actually found let me stop the share and go to my PowerPoint here. I found a really cool, quote from Luther, I think here, let's see. Why is that? Oh, I didn't pick the right one, sorry. Stop share. Let's see, share screen. Where's my PowerPoint? Oh, here it is. Yeah. And we will go over down here. Don't worry, it's coming. All right. So. You do that now. Okay, well, we'll go back one anyway. So let's see here. No, let's see here. Okay, this is from Luther's Table Talk. Sorry, I don't know why I can't get rid of this guy. There we go. Talking about Moses's difficulty and his no-go, I'm not the one, because we're gonna hear more about this, but listen to what Luther says here. Unless those who are in the office of preacher find joy in him who sent them, they will have much trouble. Our Lord God had to ask Moses as many as 6 times. He also led me into the office in the same way. You think about how he had to get Luther where he wanted Luther. Had I known about it beforehand, he would have had to take more pains to get me in. Be that as it may, now that I have begun, I intend to perform the duties of the office with his help. On account of the exceedingly great and heavy cares and worries connected with it, I would not take the whole world to enter upon this work now. In other words, you could have given me everything and I wouldn't have done it. On the other hand, when I regard him who called me, and this is the key, I would not take the whole world not to have begun it. So I found that in the Table Talk when I was looking at wherever this Exodus passage had been referred to. And I thought that was really powerful. When we think about Moses's no to what God's calling him to do, I just found that really interesting and powerful. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, but I will be with you. Okay, here we go. And this shall be a sign for you. So he's even going to give a sign, although this sign will come later. That you're going to serve God on this mountain. Did that convince Moses? I think we're going to see it didn't. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am, which in Hebrew is, it could be also like, I will be who I will be, or I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am, it's the way, or Yahweh is the way you would say it, has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. All right, so what do you want to tell him? Tell him the name. I am has sent you, and that I am is the God of Isaac, of Abraham, Isaac, and God of Jacob. That's who's sending you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites. And so we get that repetition again, flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice. All right, so now what is God doing? He's telling Moses who is calling him. He's told him, I'm the God of history. I'm the God who's been at work in, for all, in the ancestors, of which, like Ross pointed out, people knew about that. Even though it's been 400 years, they knew the story. That was passed on. This is who I am, and then this is what I'm gonna do. And then a promise to Moses, they will listen to you. The elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice. I think this is the word for worship, communal, this is sacrifice, to the Lord our God. Okay, how are we doing? Questions, comments on this section?
It
Gloria?
really shows that God, when he calls, he enables.
Yes, nice. When he calls, he enables. The explanation of the third article of the Creed in Luther's Small Catechism is that God calls, gathers, and enlightens. So enables, he enlightens, he gives us the gifts. He calls us, he gathers us together and gives us gifts to do what he's called us to do. Yeah.
But he does the picking.
And he does the picking, and he does the choosing, and he chooses Moses. Yeah. Back when Moses was a kid, because, right, the basket story, it's right from the beginning. Paul.
Oh, just thinking from this standpoint, he's put into as God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's put into that category now, is overwhelming, I suppose. And yet, what God is calling him to do is something much greater than Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob ever did.
That is incredibly cool.
Yeah.
This event coming up of the liberation is the event, and Moses is being called into it, perhaps even more than Abraham, and certainly Isaac,
And God.
and just like he provided back then for Abraham, he's going to provide again. I bet you that was overwhelming. Wait a minute. Again, who am I? There's another song that says that. Who am I? The Lord should choose me, yeah.
Well, he has a potential son, isn't it?
Yes.
And he's, it's like going there and the king is gonna say, a piece of you. And, so that's fear.
Yes.
And he's been a shepherd now for quite a while, so he's kind of phased out of all of that. But he's got something to be aware of for his future.
Yes. Interesting. This is gonna take a lot of courage, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's gotta face his fears, and he's gotta speak up. Helpful, yeah, Kathy.
I just had a question, I think ever since Moses, everybody, the Israelites would go back to that event as this is the pivotal event in our history and our faith and our culture. And I'm just curious, before that, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, like Paul said, they didn't do anything that spectacular. But would the thing that people would focus on be the promise up to it? Or what have you done any reading or?
Yeah, I think we wanna say I think the Exodus is the defining moment for the people, as a nation. But I don't want to push it too strongly because they would go back to Abraham and God's promise to Abraham. And Abraham's action of giving his only son, that was a biggie,
Okay.
you know, so we don't want to minimize that.
Yeah.
That was Abraham's big, you know, test and big, you know, even though it was God who delivered and he provided a lamb, like Ali said, a ram.
But like when the people were in Egypt in captivity, for example, and they were trying to keep the faith alive with their kids, what do they talk about?
I think they'd be talking about Abraham and God's promise and that we were gonna be at like the sand of the sea someday and we'll have a nation, we'll have a land. I think that's what they would have talked about. And then after the Exodus, when we hear the Psalms, we're gonna hear both. That I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but then we're gonna hear, I brought you out of the land.
Right.
So now they start pointing to this upcoming Exodus event. Of course, this is where it gets really kind of fun and interesting, you know, so what does the New Testament do and what does the Apostle Paul do? What does Jesus do? And so it'd be interesting when we go, what we can do, I can pull up a tool I have to see all the places that Exodus is quoted in the New Testament. And we can look and see whether it's Jesus or Paul. But the Exodus event would be distinguished from the giving of the law on Sinai that's coming up. And of course, the Apostle Paul says the giving of the law to Moses is second. The promise to Abraham is the gospel. So, and then does Paul talk about the Exodus as God's deliverance? Is interesting. We need to keep thinking about that. Like, how does the New Testament talk about the actual event of the Exodus? The New Testament talks a lot about the giving of the law to Moses and distinguishes that from Abraham. Paul does in Galatians anyway. But how does the New Testament, how does Jesus talk about the Exodus? The one thing that jumps to my mind right away is the transfiguration in Luke. In Luke, Luke tells us what Moses and Elijah and Jesus were talking about when he was transfigured. Mark just tells us that Moses and Elijah were there, and same with Matthew. But Luke says they talked about anybody remember? What book are we studying? Exodus. So in Luke, Luke tells us that Jesus and Moses and Elijah were talking about Jesus's Exodus. So there's a connection between perhaps his death and resurrection and the Exodus itself. But you know, I can also say that I'm pretty sure as we delve into this question, we're going to see that there's this process of bondage, Exodus, and new creation. The people come into the land. And they're going to do that same thing when the people are in exile hundreds of years later, when the Babylonians destroy Jerusalem and the temple, take everyone off into, not everyone, but most of the leaders and all the movers and shakers, so to speak, to Babylon. The prophets the prophet then at that point say, compare what God's going to do to what God did back in the Exodus. So we're enslaved, we're in Babylon, God's going to create a new Exodus where we're going to go home, and then God's going to make a new creation. And so a lot of when we hear that language in the New Testament, we start thinking about Jesus's death, resurrection as the Exodus, and new creation of us. So the same process gets recapitulated, I guess you could say, when we get to the New Testament. So Kathy, I know I went way beyond what you were asking a little bit, but that's what you get me thinking about. Paul.
This whole sequence of events that you mentioned is also interesting. That, you know, in Ephesians 2, it says we were in bondage.
Yes.
And then it's like the Exodus when we come to Christ, and the promised land the kingdom that he's going to establish on earth is waiting before us.
Mhm.
And so we're kind of in that time in between, but certainly, I don't know, maybe I'm making too much of it, but
Well, no, I think you're on target, and I think it becomes a big question now is what is the new creation that Jesus came to bring? And, you know, to me, the new creation is the heart of the believer and the community of believers, the church. And when Jesus comes again, he will bring the new Jerusalem, and that's it. Now, a lot of other Christians say, no, you're leaving way too much out, Pastor Bill. The new creation, yeah, we got this, people believe and the church is formed, but he hasn't fulfilled the promise of bringing God's people back into the land. And they want to see a new nation of Israel set up. And they expect that that's still going to happen or is happening or whatever. But that's a really interesting question. So, yeah.
Well, he does promise us freedom from slavery. I mean, slavery can't overcome us.
Yes. Correct. And again, and in fact, Fredheim talked about this and he wanted a both and type kind of approach. I'm more of the real foe that we're in bondage to is not the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the whatever system we live in, but it's sin. And Jesus conquered sin, death, and the devil. That's the foes that.
Kind of like our Moses.
Yeah, and he is in the sense of God used him to bring us out of them. Not our new Moses in the sense of a new lawgiver, but yeah, no, I know what you mean though. And I think, but that's the question. Is the Exodus for us a model of how God delivers people from oppression here on earth, like to this government in Central America or this government in the United States or in Russia or, or because, it's been an inspiration to people. I was also just reading as I was prepping for this, how you get off on little. I wound up reading Luther's response to the peasant war in his day. 500 years ago, the peasants were rising up against the feudal lords and because of real oppression. And so they had written 12 articles, the peasants have, and Luther writes a response to them. And the peasants in their 12 articles say, just like Moses, just God delivered the people out of slavery, God wants to deliver us out of this oppressive feudal system. So they were applying that, and Luther doesn't completely disagree with that, but he does say there's a bigger problem. And then you look at the African-American, the slaves from Africa. Their slave owners some of them learned to read and they taught them the Bible. And here in the Bible, God delivers slaves. And that was a huge inspiration to them. And certainly in the civil rights. So I don't want to spiritualize this event, but I think the big priority for us to see in the Exodus is that our ultimate problem is sin, death, and the devil. That's what we need delivering from. Yes, those three, the unholy trinity, get into governments and do oppression. So there is a place to fight for liberation. Our country was founded on a revolution, right? So, so there's a place for that, but let's make sure we don't forget that the real problem, like Paul says, isn't against flesh and blood. It's against the powers, principalities. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, but that's going to be an issue as we read through this story. Like, how do we apply this for us as Christians? Yes, Allie. Yes.
What do royal families look like in heaven?
Yes. Let's see.
Maybe none of them are there.
Yeah, maybe none of them are there. Hold on. I think of a Bible passage. Look at this, Ally, I'm gonna go over here. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people of his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous lights. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So there we go. We are a royal people. We are a royal priesthood, and we're gonna be a part of that. So that's cool. All right, we have reached the end of our time. So hopefully this was helpful and interesting and enjoyable today as we hear Moses's call. We're not done with this call. Moses is not ready to go yet. He's gonna need some more convincing. So we're gonna be edified by hearing of his struggle. All right, here we go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't circle me.